It's 6 minutes after 2. You are listening to WCQS, Blue Ridge Public Radio. I'm Dick Kowal, coming to you from the Vitust Study Club Performing Arts Studio. It's Friday at 2. Live performance here in our studios. Today, my guest is pianist and composer Pavel Wlosok, who is professor of jazz studies at the School of Music at Western Carolina University. He's hosting a jazz festival in just a couple of weeks and has a new recording of his own that's coming out this summer. He was born in Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, and came to this country, studied at the University of North Texas, and has been at Western Carolina since 2002, which is hard to believe. Please welcome pianist Pavel Wlosok. He's going to play some music for us first, and Pavel, I'll ask you just to give us a short introduction to what this is.
I'm about to play one of my most recent compositions, which I wrote for my daughter, Carolina. It's entitled Carolina, and she's turning 4 years of age shortly. So this is my piece to her.
Thank you. This is pianist and composer Pavel Wlosok. Pavel Wlosok in our studios here at WCQS, and that was Coralita. I'm sorry, say again.
Carolina.
Carolina. She's a very lucky little girl.
One of three, yes.
Well, they're all lucky then. That's a beautiful tune. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Pavel.
It's a very fresh, very fresh.
That was a world premiere, right?
That is correct, yes.
That's great. You heard it here on WCQS. This it will receive, I suppose, its public premiere during the Jazz Festival coming up in just a couple of weeks. Right?
It is my belief, yes, that we'll play this song as well.
Okay. Pavel, while I got you here, I want to ask a little bit about yourself. We're going to get to hear your music, but I'd like to talk about you just a little bit. You grew up in what is now the Czech Republic, and then came to the United States and went to University of North Texas, one of the preeminent jazz schools. So how did you find out about jazz? I mean, obviously, the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, a long, long, long history of great music there. Where did jazz come into this?
Well, I lived in a communist country, and jazz was always considered over there as a music of the Western culture, and wasn't really promoted much at all. Although, when you have musicians like Louis Armstrong or Ella Fitzgerald come through Europe, they would also perform in the Czech Republic or former Czechoslovakia as part of their tour.
Oh.
And we always used to have big festivals in jazz regardless of the communism there. So the jazz bug certainly was around. And I was lucky enough that I studied at the Conservatory of Ostrava. It's called now Janáček Conservatory of Ostrava, on the border of Poland and Slovakia, although it's still on the Czech side. And the percussion studio was just really growing, and I had lots of friends in there, my peers from the school, and they all got really interested in jazz and fusion and funk music, and needed accompanists.
Oh.
And since I was a piano player who could read music pretty well, they asked me to be part of their team. And it certainly took a few years for me to really learn about the fundamentals of improvisation and be able to transcribe lots of music which they wanted to play, because we didn't really have sheet music much for all the music they wanted to do. There was a lot of Chick Corea arrangements which we did at that time. They were very popular. They also performed on vibraphone his children's songs, which is a 20 piece kind of a series for solo piano, but it's a popular one to be transcribed for other instruments, and they use that as vibraphone players for their juries at the end of the semester. And so sometimes we'd play duets, like that. And that's how I got started with jazz around 16, 17 years of age. At the same time, we had the Velvet Revolution going on, and it was very exciting times back then.
Yeah, so a peaceful transition to democracy.
Right. It took about 6 weeks, and I remember till to this day when we actually occupied the school and locked the school and didn't let anybody in or out, because at that time media was still under influence of communism, and people were misinformed. They didn't know what was going on, and so we actually had to physically, draw flyers and then take those to the factories and let workers, the blue-collar workers, who are the majority of the working force back then, let them know what was going on, and that's how the word spread out, and eventually, Václav Havel, the writer, took over the presidency, and about 6 weeks later, we completely changed the system. It was unheard of, something like that.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It must have been, you were there at a great time. It must have been
it was very exciting times,
Yeah.
no doubt about it. I still have great memories from that period.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to jump forward a little bit, and we'll come back to this, because I want to know how a young man from the Czech Republic ends up in Denton, Texas. But I know in just a couple of weeks you're hosting this jazz festival. Yet again, this is, I don't know, how many years is this now you've been hosting
I
this
believe
festival?
this is the 15th year
Okay.
we've been doing it.
Gee whiz. So on the 22nd, you're inviting some of your friends and your students to participate in the jazz festival. And two of the folks that are going to be with you were here a number of years ago as part of the Wlosok McCurk Riley Trio, right?
That is correct. In 2006, I had invited them to take part in our festival back then, some 11 years ago. And as a part of it, they agreed to stay one more day and do a show at the Grey Eagle here in Asheville. And I had this one stereo Neumann tube mic from the late 50s, which I took with me. And just for the fun, I recorded that show, and it actually turned out pretty well. And then some 6 years later, I was able to find a label in Europe who got interested in my music. And that was the first CD they put out in 2012 under my name. And since then, we've released 4 albums, a 5th one pending this coming summer. And so it's been a real nice cooperation with especially the producer and label owner, Peter Marek, who is now my friend and very close fan of what I do.
Wow. So we're going to listen to, if I have this right, Via Creativa?
Via Creativa, yeah. Mm-hmm.
From the recording the Wlosok McCurk Riley Trio live at the Grey Eagle, and I can't believe you recorded this with one microphone. That's incredible. Pavel is also an incredible audio engineer and should get credit for that. So we'll listen to this tune, and then we'll be back, okay? Again, this is Pavel Wlosok with the Wlosok McCurk Riley Trio live at the Grey Eagle in 2006. That's Pavel Wlosok with the McGurk Riley Trio performing live at the Grey Eagle about 10 years ago or so. Pavel is my guest in the studios this afternoon. You're listening to Blue Ridge Public Radio. I'm Dick Kowal. Pavel, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
And, if nothing else, even if you weren't playing and writing the music, just the recording is amazing. So,
Thank you. Really, it means a lot because you're a great engineer, Dick, as well. And so
thank you.
I appreciate the compliment.
Oh, you're very kind. So, Wlosok, McGurk, Riley Trio that you just heard is going to be back together for this festival on the 22nd of this month. Is that right?
That is correct. It's a Saturday evening at Western Carolina University. And John Riley, the drummer who is on the recording we just heard, has been a member for probably a couple decades now of the famous Vanguard Jazz Orchestra in New York City, which is the former Thad Jones Mel Lewis big band.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
And he took over Mel Lewis as a drummer, which tells you, about his real high status in the ranks of big band drumming. And all three of us are actually graduates from the University of North Texas, so it feels like an alumni, reunion
alumni
a little
band.
bit.
That's great.
But the reason, one of the reasons why I hired John Riley to come this year and play at the festival is because both of my drummer students who have been participating and playing in the jazz band this semester will be out of town that weekend on some kind of international drumming competition.
Oh my gosh!
And they approached me early in the semester asking if I would let them do this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have signed up for the class and wouldn't be drumming for us. So since they are two of the more talented students we have in jazz drumming, I agreed to it. And I figured, well, I may as well hire a really great big band drummer who can then fit in, and that's a great way for our students in a big band to play with someone like that the entire evening. We haven't actually done this before. We usually have featured artists come and play on a couple songs, then the band is featured, so all students get involved as well.
Yeah.
But this time we'll have this terrific drummer sit in with us and play the whole evening. So I think it's a great growing experience for our students to be put in situations when they play with professional musicians.
Yes.
And it's something they can put on their resume as well.
Yeah.
And hopefully help them become better musicians down the road as well. So it has multiple positives.
You bet. It's a great way for everybody for the audience just to have a great evening and for the students to get a great education at the same time. Speaking with Pavel Wlosok, professor of jazz studies at the School of Music at Western Carolina University, and obviously the students that he's talking about, members of the jazz ensemble there at the university who will also be part of the festival, of course. I want to ask just a little bit more, not to be too personal about all this, but what was it like for a young man? You mentioned, the University of North Texas. What was it like when you first came to this country and went to the University of North Texas?
Well, it was crazy, no doubt about it. I actually came to University of North Texas to study as an exchange student, and my major was in contemporary composition, classical music, because I came from Janáček Academy of Music in the Czech Republic, and I was the first exchange student sent away for this exchange right after the revolution, a couple years after that, to kind of help build new relationships with the West, And so I had to go through audition process. I was picked by the professorship at the Janáček Academy, and my first experience flying into Dallas Fort Worth Airport was that I flew in. It was a Czech airline flight, and I got in about 11:30 p.m. And then Thomas Sovic, who is the theory professor at University of North Texas and helped establish the entire exchange, picked me up at the airport, and then we walked out of the airport, and the first thing when the door opened was 92-degree heat. at 11:30 p.m. And I couldn't believe it. I've never experienced anything like that.
I guess.
So it was my first encounter with the weather in Texas.
Wow.
And then he took me over to his place for one night, and then I was staying in dorms my first year. And it was an exchange where the American student paid for my accommodation and meal plan here, and then I was paying the same for him over there. It was the only way how we could make that work financially, because the difference between Czech currency and the American dollar was so high that we could not make it work any other way. And after my first year, I was able to get a teaching fellowship in theory, and I was asked to come back and continue my studies. And so I decided to change my major eventually to jazz piano, and got my bachelor and master degrees at North Texas.
Wow. It must have been quite an experience.
Well, first 3 months were really, really difficult because I had certain language barrier as well.
Sure.
Although I did study at language school, it was mostly British English, and only a couple of years before really moving to Texas. So just the speed of the way people were thinking and speaking, that took about 3 months to adjust to. But after that period, I started dreaming in English, and I think from that point on, I never looked back.
Would you play us another piece?
I'd be happy to. This is a very personal piece to me, which was also composed in the recent weeks and has never been performed live before. So it's another world premiere. And this piece is entitled Lament For My Father, and has to do with the experience I had gone through last year when my father passed away in November. And for those 3-4 months since then, I was thinking about how I can put that experience into my music, because it's a very personal thing. And so with this piece, I came up with an idea that there are 3 parts to it. And the first introduction has to deal with the pain and the overall experience of losing someone after so many years. And fortunately, my father didn't struggle, or it was pretty quick, and he was 80 years old, so he had a very good life, and he was a Christian who believed that there was afterlife. So it all turned out into a positive thing for us. But the first introduction deals with that big hit, when we lose someone close to us. And so it's expressed in more dissonant kind of polychordal fashion. And then the middle section, which is the longest section in the piece, has to deal with celebrating the experiences I've had throughout my life with him. And that's the actual improvised section, where one can take an improvisation on the song from there and create new ideas. And then after the theme again, at the end of that section, we go into a third part of the piece, which is a coda. And that coda has a little bit more happier sound to it, because it kind of deals with the transition of his soul from this world to another dimension. So it has a little bit happier, optimistic feel to it. Although the first 2 chords in the coda resemble those of the funeral march in Chopin's music. And so there is another connection there as well, harmonically speaking. So here's a Lament for My Father.
Pavel Wlosok live in the studios here at WCQS. That was Lament For My Father. I'm Dick Kowal. It's about 17 minutes before 3 o'clock. Hope you'll stay with us for Fresh Air at 3. Pavel, wonderful music. Gosh.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's just gorgeous. Hard to follow that. It's really quite wonderful.
Well, music for me is a very personal thing, and I like to acquaint my compositions with life experiences. I think it's the best way to develop my own personal voice and also really make my music speak.
Wow, it's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and again, that's a world premiere we just heard, and it will be premiered publicly, I guess, on a new recording that you're going to be making.
That right? Is correct. I think we'll perform it at the festival with a trio as well.
Okay.
And then the following day we'll go into the studio, and this will be one of the pieces which we will record.
Excellent. I should mention I want to hear another recording that just came out last summer. Is that right? Smile, Baby, Smile.
That is correct.
And before we get to that, which involves some local musicians with you, we didn't mention it before, but in the recording that we played a few minutes ago, you played a Fender Rhodes piano as opposed to a Steinway piano or something like that.
Right.
You want to talk about that? How you feel about
Fender
it?
Rhodes piano has been in my arsenal ever since I came to University of North Texas. I was fortunate enough that about 3 weeks into my first semester over there, Wayne Delano, a real known tenor saxophone player from that area, he now lives in Maine, was looking for a new pianist for his band. And he did an audition and asked me to take part in it, and I was hired on the spot. But I didn't have a car, I didn't have an instrument, and the venue which we were performing at weekly, Torelli's, a downtown restaurant in Dallas, needed some kind of electronic piano or a Fender Rhodes. And unfortunately, he had a neighbor, a lady who was having one in her garage for past 20 years, not being used. She divorced a long time ago, and it was her husband's, and she didn't know what to do with it. So he bought it for me for $50.
Oh gosh!
and I paid him from my first paycheck I got from him, and then he helped me drag that instrument to each gig every week in his car, and eventually I got a hand truck, to help us with that. Yeah. But just a sweet, great friend helping me out, and so I've had that instrument ever since, and I've played probably close to 1,000 gigs on it, because not every venue has a piano, and often when there is a piano, it may not be in tune, or it's probably an upright which will need some work. I'd rather play an instrument I really know well and know that it'll be in tune, because when I improvise, it has a lot to do with, of course, what I hear around me, but also how I get inspired with the instrument I play on. And so that's a major thing for me, to stay in tune and have an instrument which does that for me. So that's the story behind Fender Rhodes, and that's also one of the reasons why on the first track we listened today, Via Creativa from the Jubillee Suite album, we heard a Fender Rhodes, because Grey Eagle doesn't have a piano, at least didn't in 2006.
Yeah, sure.
And but then I revisited Fender Rhodes, and in this my last album released last summer, as you mentioned, Smile Baby Smile is its title. And the reason for that is because it blends really well with Paul Ballenbeck's guitar, who is the featured guest artist on that. Right. And I just feel like anytime I play with a guitarist, that they are a little bit, in disadvantage, because they have 6 strings, and me as a piano player, I have close to 200, and so they always feel a little bit intimidated by that. And so I figured, Fender Rhodes would be a good compromise. It's still a keyboard instrument, but it really blends well with Paul's guitar. Perhaps we could play a track to listen a little bit what that sounds like.
Yeah, this is, speaking of local musicians and local references, this is a tune that Pavel calls the ISIS Blues, and it is having to do with the ISIS Theater, the great music space in West Asheville, right?
Correct.
Okay, here we go. This is the ISIS Blues Pavel Wlosok from his recording Smile, Baby, Smile. the Isis Blues, Pavel Wlosok on Fender Rhodes piano, and his tune, along with Paul Ballenbach, guitarist, Zach Page, Evan Martin, two local musicians also on that recording, and also on the recording, but not that particular tune, Byron Hedgepeth. Pavel Wlosok is my guest on this Friday at 2 in the studios with me this afternoon. Pavel, wonderful music, wonderful
Thank
music. It must be great fun to make music with good friends. I mean, it sounds like y'all are friends when you hear your music.
Yeah, well, musicians usually keep together and support each other. We are a small scene, you know.
Yeah. That's surprising, but yes, you're right. Pavel is professor of jazz studies at the School of Music at Western Carolina University and is hosting the 2017 Jazz Festival in just a couple of weeks on the 22nd of this month. You'll be playing along with his trio and special guest Carly Johnson, who I do not know, singer. A jazz
Carly
singer.
Johnson is a vocalist from Louisville, Kentucky,
Ah,
who I got to hear first time on a record by Jacob Duncan, another great friend of mine from University of North Texas years, who I just performed with at Morehead State University last Tuesday. And that's how I got introduced to her vocals. And she's one of those vocalists who is world-class but hasn't been yet discovered. And so it's gonna be a great pleasure to feature her with our student band during our festival, as well as with the Wlosok Megwick Riley trio during that evening. And also, she's gonna spend a half day in the studio with us, putting some tracks, vocal tracks for some of my music, as well as we'll be recording a few covers by Billie Holiday originally, which Carly sings fabulously. And I've always been fond of Billie Holiday's music, so it's a great opportunity for me to combine those two.
oh, that's wonderful. Pavel, we've got about 3 minutes left. Can you play us a Reader's Digest condensed version of something, maybe to play us out into fresh air?
Yes, I've got a song which I dedicated to the legacy of Thelonious Monk, who was a bebop composer and pianist and helped change the way we think of dissonance in jazz. And this piece represents very much his dissonant style of writing, and is based off a old standard "Everything Happens to Me," which he recorded a solo on his solo album. It was a favorite piece of his to play, and so I took that original idea and then completely reworked the harmony and melody part, and made it into a piece which is entitled "Everything Happens to Sphere," and Sphere was a nickname of Monk's, so hence the relationship of the title to the homage of Monk's legacy.
Very good. And again, if we won't get a chance to say it at the very end, many thanks to Pavel Wlosok for being
Thank you
with
for
us.
having me, Dick. It was a pleasure to be here and play for you and for all the listeners as well.
Thank you. Pianist and composer Pavel Wlosok playing for us live in the studios, Everything Happens to Sphere, from his new recording, Smile, Baby, Smile. Many thanks to Pavel for playing with us. Great to spend time with a creative person. This is WCQS Asheville, WFQS Franklin, WMQS Murphy.
From WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Terry Gross with Fresh Air. Today we remember the great insult comic Don Rickles. He died yesterday at the age of 90. We'll listen back to 2 interviews with him in which he looked back on his career.